I am working on, trying to get a shot, Deer Creek. It's a Heaven and Earth Designs cross stitch. The artist is Dona Gelsinger. And I get a lot of questions about my threads. These threads are ended threads. So because there's a lot of confetti, particularly in the pine needles, those were harrowing to say the least. Because there's a lot of confetti, there are a lot of ended threads, and instead of having to flip my frame over every time I end a thread, I just pull it up. This is life-changing. Just pull it up a few inches from the top of the page, and then once I stitch the next row, I'll know for sure that they're covered on the back, and that's going to secure them, and then I can snip them off and start. When I start the next page, I'll start a new row of fringe a little further out, and I'll cut this row of fringe off. So that's just ended threads. Never have to flip the frame over to run the thread under, which helps with it getting really bulky and tight and pulling your stitches too tight. So I absolutely adore that method of ending threads. Now, parking. I've changed my parking method since I started. If you're on my Facebook account and you see the album for this, you would see that I started by parking in columns, which means when I would stitch right here, I would always park above. I would stitch a 10 by 10, park above, stitch a 10 by 10, park above. And that was creating the column lines that you see in a lot of works. Now, I've seen some people say that they washed and stretched it afterwards and their column lines came out, and I've seen other people who washed and stretched and ironed and framed and you could still see the lines, and that would just devastate me. So I decided to try to figure out a way to not get those column lines. Now I have a couple of lines right here in this water, and that's my fault for not staggering properly, but I had column lines all the way across the bottom, and those have been eliminated by changing my parking method. So instead of parking above, I park to the right. So I work a row, and I always, 90% of the time I park to the right. If there's nowhere to park to the right, and I don't need that color to the right, then my second choice is I will park above. So there are a few threads that are parked above where I was stitching right here, but most of them go over to the right. So you never see row lines, you always see column lines. So if you'll default parking to the right or to the left, depending on which way you're working, that helps with the lines that you get on your page. So these are ended threads. These are my parked threads. Some people kind of freaks them out to see all these threads, but if I keep them organized, they don't bother me too much. I do work from the bottom up. I do continental stitch, so I stitch from the top right to the bottom left. Top right, bottom left, top right, bottom left, and I always park to the top right. So you can park no matter what kind of stitch you do. You just have to always park your thread in the same hole. So I always park in the top right. So here's the square that I'm going to stitch next on my chart. I mark the chart with, it's a green highlight if I've completed the stitch. It's a blue underline if I have parked a thread there. So for example, I know that I have parked this color, and of course I remember I always park it in the top right, so I can visualize when I'm counting that I've parked all those in the top right. So this square has a good bit of confetti. Since I work left to right, I generally try to start in this corner and work my way out. So I see this dollar sign. I know, let me pull my threads first. I need to go ahead and figure out, this 10 by 10 square on my work and get those threads ready to go. So I'm going to be working right here. I'm going to unclip my hair clip, and I'm going to pull the threads for the next 10 by 10 square. And I kind of know about how big a 10 by 10 square is because I've been working on this a while, so I think that that's about right. That's probably the threads that I need. I'm going to pull those out of my clip. Now, I always kind of double check. I can tell that farthest to the right over here is that little quarter circle symbol in the M. And I know just from having worked a long time on this project that those are dark brownish gray. So if I look over here at these threads that I pulled, sorry. Here we go. The last two to the right are the dark brownish gray. So those are my threads that I'm going to be working with for this square. I have quite a bit parked. So then I keep these guys that I don't need clipped out of the way. So here are the threads I'm going to be working with. You can pull them a different way. They don't tangle. They don't, it looks like it would be aggravating, but it's really, once you get a method, it's not bad. All right, so back to the little dollar sign. I'm going to work bottom left to upper right. There's that dollar sign symbol. I can recognize it on my canvas because it has a stitch already done to the top and to the right. So it's kind of sitting there with a stitch already done to the top, a stitch already done to the right, and I happen to know that a dollar sign is a pretty light color. So I'm going to find it over here. There's my little group of threads. This is hard to do with holding the phone, but that is my dollar sign. At the bottom right corner of my square, it has a, you probably can't see it because it's 25 count, but it has a stitch done to the top and a stitch done to the right. So I'm going to thread my needle, stitch that stitch, and then decide if I need to park it or end it. While I'm talking about threading my needle, people complain about parking and having to thread their needle so many times. It really goes pretty quickly after you get used to it. This is a lifesaver. I love this needle threader. It goes in very easily, out very easily. I can thread a needle in about 2 seconds. So then I decide where I'm going to park. Default park to the right. I always default park to the right because, again, that's going to help me eliminate my column lines. So if I look at that square to the right, I don't see any dollar signs. Now I'm at the end of a page. Otherwise, I might even check the first few columns in this next square. I park normally the next 10 by 10 square over. Sometimes I'll go 2. If I don't see that symbol anywhere in that area, then I'll look above because I don't want to end the thread if I know I need it. But if I look above, I don't see any dollar signs there either. So I'll call this guy a little ninja stitch. Luckily, he's already parked there and I don't have to start a thread for it. But I'm going to thread my needle, do that stitch, and then I'm going to show you how I end a thread because I'm going to end it. Nowhere to park it to the right, nowhere to park it above. Alright, so I can't show you my actual stitching because I need a magnifier and it doesn't really work well with the phone, but I did that one little stitch in the corner. He's done. And now I'm going to end the thread. I just go straight up and come up through one of the holes near my fringe. Pull the needle off and then snip it. Oops. Be nice if I had 2 hands. Snip it about the same length as the others. And then that goes in my little orc jar. And then I'm on Goodreader, so I tap the screen, tap the highlight button, tap the stitch I did, and save. And I don't have to mark where I parked it because I didn't park it. So what would I do next? I have a couple options if I'm working from the bottom corner. I could go with the right arrow, and if I kind of look ahead, the right arrow has quite a few stitches, and I might not want to do that yet. I'm going to get some of this confetti out of the way. So I'm going to go with the star. So there was my dollar sign. There was the stitch that was to the right of it. I should see parked to the right of that, my star. So if I go back to my threads, this one right here, trying to get both strands without getting too much. There we go. That will be my star. So I'm going to stitch that one stitch, and then I look through my 10 by 10 square and I see that I got one guy right there. And I've got one guy right there, and I've got one guy right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches that I'm going to complete with a star. And then I always look to the right first to see if I can park to the right to avoid the page lines. No, not the page lines, the column lines. Alright, and look, I can park my star in the square to the right so that when I get to the next 10 by 10 square, it's already there ready to go. So I'm going to do 4 stitches and park to the right. I have completed my 4 stars that are in this 10 by 10 square, and then I'm going to slide to the right and park to the right. And there's where I'm going to park it. So I can see that I'm parking it under something that's already parked. So that'll be easy for me to find. So I already have parked in this square 1, 2, 3 threads. 2 are at the very bottom. 1 is about 3 stitches from the bottom, and I'm going to go directly under that one. And once you've stitched a project for a while, you kind of know what color that is. Oh, here we go. So let me pull this through. That's my last stitch. I have, that's the 2 that are parked at the bottom. That's the 1 that's stitched, that's parked about 3 squares from the bottom. And I'm parking directly underneath that one, which I've got to figure out how to do while I'm holding the phone. Oh, I'm in the wrong place. There we go. And without my magnifier. I find with my eyes a magnifier is absolutely necessary. So that's my 2 that are at the bottom. That's my 1 that's 3 from the bottom. I'm parking directly under that one. And then I remove my needle, stretch my thread out over here with the other guys that I'm not using right now, and clip him on. So he's out of the way. I know he's not involved in the square that I'm working on. And then remember, this is what I forget sometimes, that I have to go back, tap the screen, tap the underline button, underline the star, and save. So now I've parked my star. So I will continue this process until I finish the square. It looks like most of what I need is already parked here somewhere. So if I decide to do the little tents, I've got one parked right there. I don't see these guys parked anywhere, so I may have to start a new thread for that. These guys I've already got parked right there. So the majority of what I need I already have parked, and then what I don't have I'll just have to start new threads. But I find that the parking to the right eliminates the column lines. And then again, if I don't have anywhere to the right to park it, but I'm going to need it in the square directly adjacent above, I will park above. I just try not to park every single thread above, because for some reason that's what gives you those lines. So these guys are parked from this little area right here. So it's not nearly as confusing as it looks like it would be. You just pull out the threads that you're going to use. You can clearly see on the pattern which threads those are, and then you work your way through your confetti. I hope this helps. Thanks. Bye. Also, I thought of one more thing to add. A lot of people use different apps for marking their charts, and there's an app, or there are several apps that will search for a symbol. So let's say you wanted to search for this symbol, it would highlight all of those so that you don't miss any. That's an excellent feature, but my issue with those apps is a lot of times they crash. I just haven't had any issues with Goodreader crashing. It always saves. I never have had any trouble with crashing. So I do without that feature so that I have a more reliable app, so I don't have to worry about losing any data. And if you're working in 10 by 10 squares, it's not too hard to see what you need to stitch. I don't miss stitches too often. You know, every now and then I might miss a stitch, but for the most part, this method works well with the Goodreader app. but there are lots of different apps out there that will help you search for a symbol. It might be more helpful with cross country maybe. I don't do cross country because I want to catch mistakes before I get too far away from them. So if I'm working only in a little 10 by 10 square, I'm going to find an error when I get to the next color. And if I cross country, I feel like I'm getting too far away before I start another color, and then I'm risking miscounting and having to remove stitches. So I liked everybody to each their own, but I like to keep with a 10 by 10 square so that I can find mistakes before I get too far past them and have to prog. I think that's it this time. Thanks.